Hey everybody, hope you're enjoying your quarantined week. Certainly feel free, by the way, in the YouTube comments to sort of post reactions to the video, ask questions. We can start a discussion there, and of course pick up that discussion in online office hours, which are going to be happening, as you are well aware, certainly from the first video, Tuesdays 1 to 2:15, Wednesdays 1 to 4 p.m., and then again Thursdays 1 to 2:15. So during our regular class time, and then also during my normal office hours, which I'll be having online. And if you're looking for the link to that, you can go on the syllabus and find the WebEx link, which will allow you to join the session. So today we're going to be talking about indicators and how specifically we might measure variables in a way that's going to allow us to best describe the phenomena that we're interested in describing. So indicators, really, this is just a fancy word to describe how we go about measuring the things that we want to measure. So I think the best way to understand indicators is to look at a potential example. So press freedom in a country is one potential concept that we might want to turn into the variable level. So we could, for example, turn to experts to give us some kind of measurement of press freedom that would allow us to have something to work with in a large and quantitative analysis. So we could get experts from around the world to tell us, on a scale of 1 to 10, how free is the press in a given country. And so you can follow along here. You can go over to this website, follow this link, rsf.org/en/ranking. I'm going to pull this up so we can see it. This actually, I think this is in French, but anyway, it's the same idea. Reporters sans frontières. We can see here the Classement mondial de la liberté de la presse, the world rankings of press freedom globally, and we can see here that some countries have been rated as fairly free. We've got kind of this light color. Norway, for example, is number 1 here with a score of 7.82. In France, they switch periods and commas for decimals. It's a little confusing. But you can see Norway number 1, and then some really bad countries where there's very little press freedom, like for example in Turkmenistan, not great. That's a very high score. So we can see that if you sort of zoom around this map, take a look at all these different countries, you can get a feel for sort of the scoring here. Now, of course, how does this actually work? How do you do this? Might be good to change this to English just so that we can see it. If you go over to methodology, you can read a little bit about how the index is compiled. Okay, so they do this. They conduct essentially a qualitative analysis where they have the responses of experts to a questionnaire, and then they ask these 87 questions in all these different languages, translate them, do all kinds of things, and then ultimately arrive at this scale, which rely on a number of different categories. So pluralism, that is how many different kinds of opinions are represented in media independence, which is, again, based on these experts' ratings of how much the media are able to function independently from politics. Environment and self-censorship, essentially how much do the news sources self-censor themselves. Legislative framework, how is the legislation able to govern news and information activities. Transparencies, that is how transparent are institutions and procedures that affect the production of news. So in this case, it would be like, well, so is it well known how news gets created, right? Or do we know how reporters do their jobs, or is it something that's very secret? Infrastructure, right? Do they have actual sort of, for example, broadband internet, the kinds of things that will allow you to get news? For example, I'm sure that things like the Great Firewall are going to be rated in this infrastructure category. And then finally, abuses, which is a pretty important thing that measures the levels of actual sort of violence and physical abuses against journalists. And so they essentially have this little method where they put this together into a single score, right? So this is a really nice, visible way of understanding how specifically this indicator is created. So going back to our slides here, you can see that right in 2017, we can see that 7.6 was the best score, 84.9 was the worst. And to understand how it's constructed, we've got to look at the variety of different variables that sort of get melted into this one score. And so the Press Freedom Index, an index is essentially an indicator that is derived from a variety of different variables, captures all of this information. So that may seem to you like a very useful kind of measure, but I think really the thing to capture from this discussion is an index is only as good as the fit between the research question and the variable. Right? We want to think about what kinds of concepts are we trying to measure, and how might those concepts relate to the various sort of subscores in there. And if we were trying to choose a variable, we want to be very thoughtful about which of those variables to actually select as the variable to use in our study, because they could all tell us, some substantially different things about the phenomenon that we're trying to describe. So, for example, if I'm interested in studying abuses against members of the press or violence against the press, I wouldn't want to use the full index, because the full index captures information from, things about institutions, things about laws, things about the number of sources or the variety of sources. There's only one sort of sub-index, subcategory in that index that captures violence against journalists. I would probably want to use a different indicator, a different measure, either that rating that the RSF scholars have put together, or maybe even something else, right? Maybe just a raw measure of sort of the number of journalists that have been harmed in a country in a given year. So that might be a simpler indicator, but it might be an indicator that's more faithful to the concept that I'm trying to study. Not all indicators are good, right? That's kind of the idea that I'm trying to get across here. Sometimes an indicator that we might find out there online, an indicator that we might seek to use for our study, might not be a good fit. And so that is a really big problem in any study, and something that we want to avoid. Poor indicators can be misleading. They can cause us to have, essentially arrive at incorrect assumptions about our population. Again, sampling, all those things, not factoring into this discussion. Really, this is a separate source of potential biases that might influence our study. Even if we're sampling well, right, we might end up having problems. And so this separate set of issues that sort of plague any kind of research, from large N to qualitative, is this idea of reliability. We want to be able to get indicators which, upon repeated use, are going to continue to produce consistent results. And so if our indicators are not reliable, that is, if they're wildly sort of indicating different things, or sort of things that vary from case to case, then we could end up running into a lot of problems. And so one way that we could create an indicator is to use a basic coding scheme. And in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about content analysis as a specific form of research, and how this content analysis is one, I think, really helpful example of how we actually produce variables from just simple codes. So if we, again, look back at the RSF website, we can see that this questionnaire and this data, right, are coming together to create a single score, right, with these ranges that sort of mean different things, right? In a content analysis setting, it's up to us to sort of determine exactly how we set up our score and what those different scores are actually going to mean. And so for some of you, again, trying to apply this back to your research projects, for some of you, you're going to be able to take an existing measure like the RSF Press Freedom Measure, for example, and use that, sort of find the actual number for each one of your cases, be they countries or states or whatever, and sort of input those into a spreadsheet, right? That long data set that we've been talking about this whole time. Others of you are going to have to generate potentially your own scale or your own index from scratch. And so in the next video, we're going to see an example of how to do that with content analysis that will hopefully illustrate to you a good and easy sort of way to engage in reliable coding of your cases. So I'm going to go back to my coffee now, and I will see you in just a second in the next video. So long.